looking back on it, might have been a bit violent, going on stage when you're extremely shy.
Hello and welcome to Story X Story, the podcast by mayamada that dives deep into stories across pop culture, brings you closer to the people who make them, plus gives you advice on creating your own. It's episode 245 and I am your co-host Nigel.
I am Tazziii, content creator and co-host.
And for our behind the story episodes, we like to talk to creative professionals and practitioners across industries to unpack their journey. And today we're going to hear the story behind script consultant and writer Alizée Musson. Alizée, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, no, thank you for joining us. I'm always happy to have people who span, and in this case, like animation, figure out how it all works. We talk a lot about animation on the show. So, yeah, nice to take a deep dive into how it all works from your perspective. Thanks for joining us. And for listeners, you can subscribe to Story X Story wherever you get your podcast from, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube as well. You can send us your feedback and questions in a variety of ways. You can chat with us in the new look mayamada Studio 77 Discord. You can email us studio77@mayamada.com, or you can throw your thoughts at us on social media. We are at mayamada TV on Instagram and TikTok, and at mayamada.com on Blue Sky, or at Life of a W Gamer on Instagram and TikTok, and at Tazziii on everything else. You can also head to mayamada.com to get an overview of the mayamada brand. Check out the stuff that we do, as well as comics, workshops, events, that kind of thing. And yeah, just discover what we're all about. Next up on mayamada, we're looking a bit further ahead. We'll be doing another Studio 77 report. So Studio 77 is our digital platform and community where creators at any stage can connect and grow and create together. So we are on a mission to equip generations to thrive on that creative journey. And you can share your creative journey with us. So we did this last in the spring Studio 77 report. And yeah, we're looking for guests to share what they have been working on in each Studio 77 report live stream. So we had Haz Dalal join us to talk about his upcoming Kickstarter. And so whatever your project, whatever your stage is, reach out to us and you can get a slot on the live stream and chat with us there, or you can just put your progress in our Discord and we'll shout you out. We've also set a challenge. So each season, when we do a new report recording, we'll set a different challenge. So for spring, it was about renewal. So we want to see how you are embracing renewal for the spring. So you can share what you've got going, creative experiments, reinvented projects as well. Share them social media or post in our Discord as well. And then we'll shout those out too in the summer for the summer Studio 77 report. So yeah, make sure you're in our Discord and be part of that creative journey. So more to come on the brand at the end of the show. But for now, let's find out more about our guest. Alizée is a script consultant and writer who has had a diverse academic path and began a career in script development through different freelancing roles with companies such as Thierry Artisans Art Images, Entertainment One, Amazon Studios, Ubisoft, and Walt Disney. And in 2026, she published The Art of Writing Animation, Storytelling Craft for Writers and Animators with UK publisher Creative Essentials. It's a book that explores the creative process behind critically acclaimed animated films and series through conversations with their creators. So that's the kind of thing that we like to see. So we talk a bunch about animations, but we don't always talk to the creators. So it'd be good to get that insight from you, Alizée. So people who listen to the podcast, if you've been listening for any length of time or just following mayamada, you'll know that creativity is very important to us. But for our first question, Alizée, what does creativity mean to you?
So for me, creativity has always been very much linked with storytelling because working mainly with writers, in film, in animation, it's my area, I would say. But I would say creativity really is about creating different points of contacts between people. So on the one hand, you're sharing a part of yourself, a part of your story. In another part, you have an audience on the other side who is listening. You have other creative collaborators to work with. So it's really about creating connections between people. That's what is creativity for me.
Yeah, I like that idea of connection and storytelling. That's a good description. Thank you for that. And like I mentioned, you've just released a book as we record. So the arts of animation, storytelling craft for writers and animators. So that was in February, and we'll dig into the book a bit more. But just as you're in that post-launch period, what has the reception been, and what do you do after you launch and release something?
So it's the very first book that I write. So I'm very much in the discovery phase. It's the first time I go through this.
Mm,
So at the end of 2025, I finished writing the book. It went through a couple of editing phases. And then it launched in February. So at the moment, I'm attending quite a lot of events and festivals. I just came back yesterday from Dingle in Ireland, where there is an incredible animation festival called Animation Dingle. If you get a chance, I definitely recommend it. It's in a beautiful part of Ireland as well, so gorgeous part of the country. And then next, I'll be going to the London Screenwriters Festival in April, where I'll be talking about writing for animation. So it's a lot of going out to meet readers. Actually, I did my first book signing this weekend, where I got
cool.
to meet a lot of students in animation. And it was really, really nice to get to talk to this new generation of filmmakers, in animation, to get a sense of what they like, what they're looking for. I noticed that I got quite a lot of interest in the book because many students were telling me in their degrees they learn a lot of technical skills, but many are telling me that they don't get so much support or teaching into storytelling, especially in animation. How do you write? How do you tell a story with animation? So there seemed to be quite a lot of interest in the book because they seem to feel like it wasn't coming from their university degrees. So I found it interesting.
Yeah, I think that how do you tell a story? How do you tell a good story as well? As I get the impression that's not always being covered, the technical stuff, which obviously is important. But yeah, I think you can have that and not know how to tell a story still. So it's good that you're filling in that gap.
And to be honest, it's a lifelong journey, like
Yeah, of course.
you first you're a watcher, a reader, you absorb stories, and then when you become a filmmaker or a storyteller, you become the one who writes, and every project you work on is going to be a learning, experience.
No, for sure. And yeah, we'll get into more of the process of making the book and storytelling as well. But want to get to your journey as well, is like to start at the beginning or thereabouts. So can you tell us about your earlier days? Like where did you grow up and what led you to get into writing and screenwriting in particular?
So you might want to get a map out because I've moved
Okay.
around quite a lot.
Do you
Um,
like traveling? So
it just that's the way things turned out. So I'm from France originally. I'm from a small town called Orleans. So I always say you have New Orleans in the US, and I'm from Old Orleans in France. And when I was about 8, I moved to the Netherlands. I moved to The Hague, where I grew up until I was 18. And that move, when you're quite small I moved from a very small town to a very multicultural city. I went to school in a different language. All of a sudden I'm learning to speak English. There was a lot to take in, and it was very unsettling in a way. And I think that was the beginning of me taking refuge in stories. As a teenager, I was also very shy. I'm still an introvert, but I was incredibly shy at that time. And I was reading a lot of books, any form of storytelling, really. I would watch a lot of movies, I'd go see plays. And it was really a form of escapism, but that would also help me understand maybe what I was going through at the time. So, in a way, by disconnecting with the world around me, I reconnected with it in a weird way. And that's something that I think is super important when you want to be a storyteller, is really to absorb as many forms of stories as possible. So, because you guys specialize in mangas and graphic novels, also explore stories in a different format, watch films, play video games, just absorb as much as possible. And so I was very much absorbing a lot when I was smaller. And then as a teenager, I started doing quite a lot of theater as a way to help me confront my shyness, which, looking back on it, might have been a bit violent, going on stage when you're extremely shy. But it did
Oh, I
help.
thought you meant you were in some like weird kind of plays or something
Oh,
like
no, 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 no.
that.
Just it felt, I think, for
Like
anyone who's
extreme,
shy,
like
yeah, it feels
yeah, big step.
extreme.
I get that.
It's very, you feel very exposed.
Mm.
But what I preferred, I would take part in school plays. It wasn't so much going on stage, it was being backstage and being part of that community, of creating a story together. And from there, I started to hesitate between studying theater and cinema because I was watching a lot of films. I think it was my preferred form of storytelling at the time. And I ended up deciding to study film because I thought, well, I've tried theater at a small level already, so let's try film and see how it goes. And so I moved to the UK, where I studied at the Arts University Bournemouth. I did the BA in film production. So I was very much in live action at the time. And that's where I started becoming friends with some of the animation students. And that's where I discovered animation. I remember that what was good about the program is that you start by experiencing different departments, which I think is also super important if you want to go into film, because it's a collaborative medium. You're always going to collaborate with different departments. So it's really good to understand what these departments do, to work with them. And then we specialized in the second year, and I specialized in producing. And I remember being on film shoots, and having to solve practical problems all the time and running around. And then I would step into the animation studio and everybody was drawing and listening to The Lion King. And I just went, yeah, that's where I want to be. I like that.
Yeah.
So that was, one of the first encounters I had with animation. And then I studied a little bit in Prague in the Czech Republic, came back to the UK. So yeah, as I said, I moved around quite a lot, but that was the beginning, I would say.
Yeah, and that sounds like a quite well planned path, or was it? Was it always clear that you wanted to do, if not specifically, you knew about animation in the beginning, but something in that direction? So you're always searching for that. Is that what it was, or how did you feel about that journey?
Well, looking backwards now, yeah, it might sound very planned, but it was not at all. I remember in university, I think I first wanted to be a director, and many people that go into film first want to be directors and then might discover actually something else. So I think that's initially what I wanted to do. And then I realized I was more attracted to, and actually, I chose the producing specialism because it was the one where you could be as involved as possible with all the different departments. So I didn't quite know yet. I think I wanted to experience everything a little bit more. And for any students that goes to university, I really encourage, you to take that time to explore beyond your own department, explore different what other people are doing. It's really a time of discovery, and you have that time to do it in a safe environment. So take advantage of that. And I think I always liked animation, but I didn't know how to work in it. The link wasn't really there. So I really discovered that at university. I also, when I was 18, I went to the Annecy Animation Festival, which is the biggest animation festival in the world. It's in the Alps in France. And that, I didn't know what to expect, but I really got to meet people who work behind the scenes in animation. And I realized it was possible to do that. I even thought for a second about switching my degree to animation. And then, I came back to reality and realized I had no drawing skills, good enough to be an animator. So I stayed in the film degree, but I got involved in a lot of animation projects whenever I could.
Okay, that's cool. So you really like immerse yourself in in that world. And I mean, I've not been to Annecy, but I know that's like the place to be in the animation world. So that's really cool to get that at like a relatively young age, I imagine.
Yeah, they do this thing, and I think they still do it, where they have a student pass that allows you to see films, but also go to the market for a
Right.
day. And it's you can walk around and talk to companies, and it was just a really nice discovery in a way. I used to go to film festivals as a volunteer. I volunteered a lot as a student, and that's also a really good way to start to meet people, in the industry, people at your level with other volunteers who are often, students as well, but also professionals that have more experience.
Mm.
So that's another way I think I started getting in to the industry, and I would definitely recommend it. But no, there wasn't. I just knew I wanted to be part of that world. How I would get involved was I didn't even know my current job as a script consultant existed. It's a very niche job that you don't necessarily hear about right away when you step into film. So it's something I discovered later.
And I mean, if there's roles that like you didn't know at the time, when it comes to family perception about what you do, is that something you've had to explain to them? Do they know what you do? Like, how do you explain what you do to your family?
So they understand that I work with scripts. I write as well, but I mainly work at the moment as a consultant with other writers. So I help them
Mm.
develop their stories. But my family has always been incredibly supportive of me going into the arts. And I think where I was, in a way, well, basically, I had a great uncle who was an actor in France for a long time, and he passed away when I was a teenager. But through that experience, I was never attracted to film for the glamour of it, for
Mm.
the screenings. I'd heard the stories about him struggling, that it wasn't an easy job, and that if I wanted to take that path, I would have to work really hard. And my parents, also were aware of it. So there was an understanding of what it took to be in the arts, I would say. And yeah, I'm incredibly lucky that they were supportive and are
Mm.
still supportive today.
Yeah, cool. That's nice. And as you look back at like your earlier days breaking into the industry, what was the best advice that someone else gave to you when you were starting on your journey, and did you follow it?
So this one actually happened a little bit after I finished my studies. After I did the BA in film production, I knew by that now that I wanted to work in writing and development, but I was a bit scared that, what do I do if it fails? What if, how do I make money? How do I make a living doing this job?
Mm.
So I did a master's in creative entrepreneurship because I was like, if all else fails, I'll have a bit of a business background. Um, and during that master's, I did an internship with an animation studio where they ended up hiring me as a marketing person. And it was a good way for me to get started. I, on the side, I'd already started signing up as a freelancer, and I started as a reader in the industry, which is usually the path when you want to go into development. So what a reader does is they sift through all the scripts that are sent to companies, and then based on the editorial directions they're given, they pick the scripts that then go on to be read by the producer. So I started by doing that first for festivals that have script competitions. I would do it voluntarily for free, and that allowed me to build a portfolio. So while I was doing that, I needed to pay my bills. And I started working for this animation studio in marketing. And I remember that one day I was introduced to a collaborator in the studio as a marketing expert. And I just thought to myself, how did that happen? Because I did not feel like a marketing expert at all, and I started feeling this frustration. I was like, how? how, I think I was talking about it with a friend one day. I was like, oh, why are people seeing me as a marketing expert? That's not what I am. I want to go in development. And then that person who was a little bit older than me just stopped me there and said, well, do they know that? And I realized, I was like, well, that's a good point. Sometimes you just get into the job and you don't necessarily tell people around you what you want to do, or what you want to get into. And that was great advice. And, from there, I started being a little bit more vocal about what I wanted to do. And it was a really great studio. I loved working there, and I loved working with everyone who was there. And I just started sharing more. I wasn't always saying, oh, I want to do this or do that, but I would share things that I'd get, passionate about story wise. And then when I stopped working for that studio, they were actually one of the first ones who hired me as a script editor. So that was, great advice that I would absolutely give to people starting in the industry. You might start in a position that might not be what you want to do, but it's still a first point of contact. And, do your job well, whatever that job is that you've been given, but also talk to people around you in the studio. Let them know where you want to be. And if you don't know yet where you want to be, but you're interested in trying something, let people know. One thing that is great in this industry is that, especially in the UK, that's something I found is very particular to the UK, is that there's a sense of apprenticeship and craftsmanship in the film and animation industry, where senior people are quite happy to help out juniors because that's how they started in the industry. So I would say don't hesitate to talk to people that are, have more experience than you. Ask them for their advice. It's the whole buy them a coffee. And I've done that a lot when I started out, and I met incredible people along the way. People are usually very nice, very generous with the advice they give. And yeah, I think that was one of the best advice I was given. And I would definitely pass it on, to the next generation.
Yeah, no, I think it's good point to make, especially the talk about what you want, and it's not necessarily about like, here's the 4 point plan of exactly what I'll be, but just say like, this is what I like, and this is what I'm into, and this is what.
Yeah.
It's mad how, because we do like talks and workshops, and even I think it was last week as we were recording, where I was in a college, or maybe it's the week before, but I was in a college and just asking people, what do you like, what do you what do you want to do, or just give me a direction. And I get that at that stage things, you can be awkward, and especially like you don't know people, you don't know, I'm just turning up. Well, but just I made the point, like just say, like, don't be afraid to say, just this is the kind of thing I like, and you never know who's listening, who knows who, and who can help you like get to that next step as well.
Exactly. And ask questions as well, in your points of interest. I actually, way before that, there were a couple of times where I worked as a runner on films, which is when you're an assistant, you kind of do everything and anything. And it's a great way to sort of get a sense of, oh, okay, I like that. Oh, no, I don't like that. Oh, I'm interested in this. I'd like to learn more about that, and then just start asking questions. That's really a great way to start building a network around you, and getting a sense of what might work for you.
Yeah, and I noticed with your background, you did a bunch of freelance roles with quite big companies, and we've talked a bit about like the technical side in terms of like looking at scripts and writing. Do you feel there's something that isn't technical that led you to those roles, like any kind of non-technical skills that helped you make those freelancing steps?
I distinctly remember being a student and having professionals coming in and me asking, but how did you do this? How did you get into this industry? And the answers were always a bit vague. And now that I'm on the underside, I'm like, yeah, I get why, because it's all I did was really, I tried to go to events. I went to festivals. Just put yourself and your work out there, and you don't know what might happen. I never imagined I would work for those companies. In the early days, I still work as a freelancer, but when I started out, I was working part-time as a freelancer, but I put a website together so that people could, find me. I was on LinkedIn. I had business cards, and I went to any festival, I could find. I just went there. And it's that thing of putting yourself in the room, and trying to meet people. It's weird because networking is a term that can be a bit vague. What is it actually to network? What do you do? And it's really about making connections with people. Ask people what kind of films do they watch. Do you guys have the similar taste? That can create a connection. Asking a senior person about their role in in the industry, that can be a connection. And then sometimes it's been just asking plainly, do you need a reader? Do you need an assistant? And then see what people say. I would say for all those roles, it's been a mix of meeting people at industry events or people finding me online through my website or on LinkedIn. So definitely have all those, your online presence really reflect what you want to do in a way. Because again, you never know what might happen.
Yeah, true. And even that same group, there's a few people, and we asked, like, do you have a portfolio for the thing you want to do? And they're like, no, we don't. I'm like, there's the first step. How would we know if you don't put it out there? So, and you said you work as a freelancer. Do you feel comfortable as a freelancer? Because it's a tricky, like, it's a difficult path to follow. I mean, there's different ways to work, and I know some people prefer like just 9 to 5. But as a freelancer, do you feel comfortable there?
So I've been a freelancer now for 9 years. And an advice I got in the early days was there's different ways to freelance. Find the one that works for you. So some people, for example, like to just do long gigs that are, a couple of months and then you move on to the next one. Other people like having multiple little gigs at the same time, Another way to freelance is also having a mix of the two. And you figure all that by trial and error, by the way. There's no other way around that. And for me, what works best is having a mix of longer gigs where I'm involved on a project for a couple of months and also on the side having smaller gigs that might take me a couple of days or a couple of weeks. That I found is where I feel the most comfortable on the financial point of view as well, because that's really important as well. You have to feel, financially sustainable. What I did at the beginning is, as I said, I worked part-time at a job and I was building the freelancing on the side. And that's a really good way to get started if you can, because then you don't have to worry about finances. You have a monthly income coming in and you have time to build your freelance business on the side. So that's something I would definitely recommend at the start. And there was a point though where the freelancing work was coming in and then the company I was working for needed someone that was more involved. So that's when I knew it was time to make a decision and step into full time. But it constantly changes being a freelancer. In the last couple of years, I'm sure you've heard this from other professionals you worked with, it's become really difficult for everyone working in the industry, especially freelancers. I worked for a couple of years as a translator as well in script development. And all that work all of a sudden dried up with AI. So
Yeah.
we're very much in a stage, even for me, who's been freelancing for 9 years, where we have to reinvent ourselves as an industry and as individual creators. And it's not easy every day, not at all. But I try to look at it, from the perspective of, well, it's also a chance for new opportunities. So I try to stay open-minded and look which areas, I can work in. And I would say that would be my advice to young freelancers. Try to stay open-minded, try to get a feel for where the industry is at. Read, all those trade magazines, follow the news, talk to people at festivals, and see how you can fit in that market with the skills you have.
Yeah, that flexibility is like really important from what I've seen. Just being flexible, adaptable, and I think it's good that you've outlined the different kinds of freelancers as well. I think that's really important because I hadn't even considered that myself. Like, I think when we say freelancers, we think of one type, or perhaps some people might think of one type, but yeah, there's different ways to do it. So that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I also, it's kind of like networking. It's a term that can be very vague.
Yeah, yeah. How do you
and
define it?
uh, and I never thought there were different styles of freelancing, and that really was great advice when I realized that. I was like, oh, okay, I can find the one that works best for me.
And when it does come to roles, so I when I did the introduction, I mentioned that script consultant. You, I think, talked a bit about like development. I know there's like development executives. So these are all roles that one might not naturally just come up with when you think about the animation process. Can you explain like the differences between those types of roles and what they impact when it comes to animation writing?
So what also makes it hard to know more about this profession is that it goes by different names. So
Right.
it can be difficult to understand what it is. But a script consultant can be called a script editor, a dramaturg as well, sometimes as well script doctoring. But there's slight differences between those different roles, but essentially there's some similarities as well. So what I do as a script consultant is that I work exclusively in development. That's really the beginning stage of a project when we're writing the story and we're writing the script as well. Now in development, there's something that's different than from live action, which I talk a lot about in the book, which is that story might not just be found through writing, it might also be found through the animatic, which is the storyboard which has been put on a timeline and where the blocking starts to happen in the scenes, where early drawings of what happens in the scenes are done. So there's a lot more interaction between visuals and writing, I would say, especially in film. In TV, it's a little bit different. The TV process for animation resembles the live action one a lot more, where the writing happens first and then writers have very little interaction with the design teams. That's very much separate. And that's due to timelines and budgets. In TV, there's less time and less budgets are often tighter than for feature films where there's a lot more time for the development and the production. So I get involved in that stage with the writers and I basically help them write and develop their stories. So that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean at the very beginning, helping them flesh out the ideas into, a structure. It can mean helping them develop characters. It's kind of like I'm the first privileged spectator of a film where I get to see the writing for the first time, and then I give them my impressions of what I'm seeing on the page, what I'm reading, and that's really crucial when you write. I would say, when I was writing the book, there was a point where I was like, am I making sense?
Yeah.
What am I writing anymore? I don't know. And
Yep.
having my editor give me feedback and tell me, no, this makes sense. Oh, this doesn't so much make sense. I needed that to know that I was going in the right direction. And I can be involved at a later stage when there's been a couple of drafts of the scripts. I can be involved in developing what's called treatments and Bibles, which are more prose documents that are used to pitching a project. So it's I like the variety of the work. It's every job is different.
And I know that feeling of like, yeah, you write something and then it's like, what is this? This is actually rubbish. Why did I start doing this? And
Oh, and this happens to everyone, by the way.
yeah,
It just, there's always a point where you're like, what? We say you don't see the forest, the trees from the forest. You're a bit
mm,
lost. And the only way you're going to start seeing again is having an external point of view.
yeah, that's a good point. Good point. And so, I mean, speaking of writing, like I said, you have a book, and because you mentioned it's your first book, so the Art of Animation is the first book that you've written. What was the spark that inspired you to write this book, or just take this step of writing a book? And how did that come together?
So it's called The Art of Writing Animation specifically, because it's all
Ah,
about
yes,
writing, just
yeah,
to clarify. It came about when I was writing, no, when I was teaching, writing for animation. I was teaching workshops a couple of years ago. And I got an idea to write a book which was focusing on the process of writing. I didn't want to write a book that gave formulas on how to write. That's not how I think writing is done. So I've always been curious about creative processes. I just love hearing about how people create, what's their journey. So I pitched the idea to the publisher, and they liked it. So that was the beginning of a 2-year journey where I was incredibly lucky to meet amazing creators, animation filmmakers from all over the world. I got to interview people from Pixar. I got to talk to Brenda Chapman, for example, who's the director of Brave, but also has a long career as a story artist. I talked to one of the co-creators of Ratatouille, the writer of Inside Out. I also talked to a producer from Studio Ghibli, the producer of The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, who told me how he worked in the past with Takahata and Miyazaki and how they create, what's their creative process. But also, so people in film, also independent filmmakers, Tom Moore in Ireland. I talked to people in both film and television, people as well who are writing short films. People that are young graduates or that wrote, their first film. And just I put all those interviews in the book, and I try to, just show how there's no one way to write a story. And my hope with the book, when people read it, is that it will inspire them to play around with their own writing process or their own creative process. And I hope they read it and they go, oh, I like this bit. I want to try doing something similar. Or, oh, I don't like this. This isn't for me, So I wanted to create a wealth of experience gathered into the book. And then I shared a little bit as well, some of my journey and the way I work as well as a consultant. So there's a part of the book called the Story Editor's Corner, where I write questions I often ask to creators when they're writing, and things that I often come across when I work in development.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting to hear you say like you, because you've interviewed a wide range of people, and you started off by saying like, so you were introverted and on that side of the, say, social spectrum. Was it a challenge for you at this point to chat to so many people, or was it something that by this point you were comfortable with?
Oh, it's always a challenge. Like I'm very comfortable now, but like stepping into the podcast today was a challenge too.
Yeah.
So it's just part of who I am. I'm an introvert, and it does become, I have to say, it has become easier over the years. I would say the fear doesn't go away, but the way I deal with it, I've kind of have a process now where, I mean, if you talk to people from my high school, sometimes I would go to class and not talk for a whole 90 minutes because it was
Mm,
so difficult for me to speak up. And networking as well early on in my career was really difficult to um, go to people and start talking to them. And it was little steps, the more you do it, the more you get to know yourself, you know, forgive yourself as well if you feel like, uncomfortable at any point when you talk to someone. It's all about, learning along the way. Now I know that when I do interviews or when I step on stage, I have a, before I do it, maybe a 15-minute panic. And I just know that it's part, like I need to get it out of the way, and it's better
right.
to get it out of the way before you start recording,
Sure.
So yeah, I just found a way, to deal with it in my own way.
Cool. All right, got the panic out of the way. That's good. And I mean, you also you've spoken to a lot of people at different levels, and some people at quite a high level. What did you find there was like common threads among the people that you spoke to on across different projects?
In terms of what they told me, they all highlighted collaboration is key and really push for more collaboration across departments, and sometimes that collaboration is not possible on projects again because of time and budget. Things have to go fast. But I think everyone really talked about the need to collaborate in this industry and in the making of animated stories. I think that's the most common one, I would say.
Yeah, no, I feel like particularly for I think for any story, but just imagine like things like animation and video games as well. Perhaps like that collaboration is just like key. And you said so. Part of the idea of this book is talking to different people and showing there's no one way to write a story. Do you feel like there might not be a one way to write a story, but do you feel there are I don't know, like certain principles that you keep coming back to that help make a good story?
Um, I would say, it's a big question. In terms of character, spending time digging into your character psychology, who are they as a person, knowing what their belief systems are, where do they come from, and what's their journey into the story. Really developing their arc, getting a strong sense of character is important.
Mm,
Then, in terms of what's really important in animation as well, is we often go into worlds that are completely different from reality. That's the strength of animation. It represents reality rather than captures it. So you want to be clear in how you introduce that world. Make sure you have rules for that world and that they're consistent throughout. And then in terms of structure, I mean, every story has a beginning, middle, and an end. And that's been, translated into what's known as the three-act structure,
yeah.
which I call the universal language of structures, because that's the one everybody is familiar with. And I would say with structure, I think there are two types of structures when we develop this. The structures we use to deconstruct stories, and then there's the structures we use to construct stories. So what I mean by that is there are certain structures that are good to analyze stories, to get a sense of, okay, what might not be working, or to understand a story. And I think the three-act structure is great in terms of that because it's universal. It's the one everybody knows. And it allows us to have a common language to discuss a story. But it might not be the one that makes the most sense to a creator when you're constructing a story, so when you're making it. So there's lots of examples in the book of creators having a lot of different approaches to structure. So, for example, Tom Moore, who made films like Song of the Sea or Wolfwalkers, which are all based on Irish folklore and Irish mythology, he used the writer's journey and the hero's journey quite a lot because that's a structure based on mythology. That's how it first originated. So that structure made sense for the stories he was trying to tell. But that doesn't mean it's the right structure for everyone. I had another writer who, told me, well, I don't like having this three-act structure. For me, what dictates the structure is the character's journey. So I really focus on that. So there's really, lots of different approaches you can have with structure. You, as a creator, when you're constructing a story, you have to make sure it's the one that makes sense to you and to your story. And then, as I said, there's also the structures to deconstruct and understand stories better.
That's a really good shout in terms of like how to look at structure because I agree like you can have different principles or structures and it doesn't necessarily work for every single thing. I think it's understanding when to either go with something different or even tweak the one you've got for the story that you're trying to tell. It's quite a hard judgment to make though.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the thing that I often notice when I do script consulting sessions with young writers is
Mm,
that they tend to use structure like a formula that they need to fit in,
mm,
and before they even know what they want to talk about. So they're really hanging on to the how of the story, but they don't know the what, what we're talking about. And that often leads to stories that don't really work, that are rigid, that are predictable, because storytelling isn't mathematics. It's not, there's not a magic formula that's going to make it work. It's, development is messy and, you have to do a lot of back and forth. You might have to, write scenes, deconstruct scenes, there's no one way to do it, really. But what's important is not to approach it from a very formulaic, approach. And I always tell writers, stay open and play, within your story world. What if the what if game is really a good tool to try to think about new ways you can tell your story. What if my character was different? What if we were in a different time period? It can unlock new things. And as I always say, as long as we save our drafts on a USB stick or an external drive, if it doesn't work in the future, we can always go back to it. So it's never lost, So take advantage of that and play, explore new things.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you've always got the draft to go back to.
Exactly.
Okay. So then, from the conversations that you had, was there anything that surprised you that, I imagine you had some sort of plan when you started this and going into it. Was there anything that, surprised you in the conversations as you were putting the book together?
So a lot of the book was, I didn't know who I was going to meet. I feel incredibly lucky to have been able to talk to the people I talked to. And there were some questions that I wanted to explore and plan at first, and then things, new ideas came up along the way. I think maybe what I discovered, which I didn't know when I started writing the book, I have a better understanding of how animators, approach storytelling and writing specifically, because often writing is very difficult for people that have a background in animation. It's just not how they communicate. And they have a tendency to see writing like sketching. So that means that when you sketch something, it's instantly clear. It's that quote, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But when you write and you have to deal with 1,000 words, it's a lot harder. And so I really discovered that for animators or people, that have a background in animation, it can be really difficult to express their ideas through writing. But that doesn't mean they don't know where their story is going. So it's, really important to be aware of this and trying to ask the right question to understand what they have in mind, what they visualize. So I think that's what, I guess, surprised me, that's something new that I discovered, There's also a feeling in that approach of, writing is like sketching, that people in animation sketch really fast, and it's super easy to do a quick sketch, do another one. And in writing, it's not so fast, That's something that can be sometimes hard for writers working with animators. Animators may not be so precious with a draft, while writers, have spent hours on it. So, understanding, how different people view writing was really interesting.
Yeah, and I like what you said about the characters and getting into the character psychology. I was just actually remembering even earlier today where we're looking at some of the characters for a future mayamada story and fleshing out their character arcs and, as you said, what they believe, and we're thinking about how does their worldview change from when we first meet them to the end of the story, and then shaping the story around that. And it brings up some interesting things. I think in some cases it can, I guess, strengthen what you thought about character, but then also brings up some, is that correct? Is that what I'm trying to get at? And does that make sense for the story I'm trying to tell? And I imagine over the coming weeks we'll kind of make some changes to certain characters, particularly like the antagonist, I feel, of this story, where like what are they actually after, and what do they believe? Because even on that side, you can be quite shallow with the antagonist, or that's the bad guy and doing bad things for bad reasons. But we actually came to a point where the reasons that they're doing things actually, if not reasonable, but relatable, and definitely ones you can empathize with, but maybe not the execution. So I like the idea of spending some time with the characters and seeing what comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you just said, about the relatable side, I really believe that characters are the gateway for the audience into the story. It's, it's going to be their guide into the story. It's the people they're going to follow in those strange, worlds, and in those strange journeys they're going to go into. And you have to make those characters, relatable for the audience to follow them into the story. That doesn't mean they have to be likable always, but they need to be human enough for us to understand their point of view.
For sure. So then when because and again, the people you've spoken to have done work that we might have heard of, but again, you mentioned some independent things. As an observer, as someone who watches animation, where do you feel good things are being done? Like maybe like good or even like new storytelling techniques? Like what's interested you recently with animation?
So I'm a huge fan of Blue Eye Samurai.
Oh yeah, that's great.
It's one of my favorite animated TV shows at the moment. And I think there's some really interesting things being done in the adult animation sphere
Mm,
because, historically, and still a lot of people believe that animation has to be, or equals children's content, but it's
yeah.
not only that. Also, adult animation, again, historically in the past, used to sort of be more oriented or targeting a male audience. And it used to be mainly comedy. So, I'm thinking of things like The Simpsons,
Mm,
all of that. Those shows, in the way, they were marketed, they're sort of targeting a male audience, and it was all about comedy. But I really think in the past few years, there's a lot more variety of stories being told for an adult audience. And I find that particularly exciting. Also, stories, that have female protagonists or that target a different, not just a male audience. So it's a really interesting space at the moment that I'm quite curious to see how it will evolve.
yeah, for sure. There's a bit more like inclusion in terms of, like you say, the demographics in who's being targeted. So it's not just for kids. Definitely not not just for kids,
Hmm.
and inclusion within like the character. Like when as you were talking, I was thinking of something like I don't know if you've seen Vox Machina.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that strikes me as because like the cast, I don't know how. I wonder how they do that actually. Because so the cast is quite diverse. It's very diverse from a visual perspective. Like the characters look different, the backgrounds are different, and then even trying to think like there's I'm fairly certain from judging from some of the characters, there's a lot of LGBTQ representation in there, but none of it feels tokenistic,
Hmm.
and that's really cool. It's just like different characters and they're bringing things to this whole. So and it's certainly definitely not for kids. It's not a show for kids or things like Invincible as well. Like yeah, I'm quite impressed with how people are doing it well. So not just like ticking a box of diverse characters and storylines, but having interesting characters and then just having them come from different perspectives.
Absolutely. Animation is a really interesting space in terms of inclusivity. As part of the book as well, I interviewed Julia Ann Cromet from the Moxie Collective, who specializes in inclusive storytelling. And she worked
Mm,
in animation quite a lot. She talked about the work she did on Encanto, for example. So I had an interview with her, and one of the things that we discussed is that, as you said, there's a lot more, in the past few years, there's been a lot more inclusion of characters, coming from backgrounds we might not have seen before, characters with different sexual orientations. And an area which I find particularly interesting, which can be currently pushed a lot more throughout the media, but in animation particularly, is showing more disabled bodies. Because what's really interesting when we talk about animation is that you're in full control of the frame. You don't have to deal with reality in any way. You don't have to put a camera down and capture what's real. You can invent everything. So you have the opportunity to represent different body types. And that's something actually that has changed in the past few years, because if you look at shows from the 80s and 90s, characters often have the same body shapes.
yeah,
Especially if you look at women, like they often
yeah.
have the exact same body
Same.
shape, and they're all, really thin, like, so
Mm,
it's just one body type. And the reason that was done was for production purposes, because it was faster to reanimate the same body types. It's not inclusive. And something that has changed over the past few years is showing different types of bodies, not just, in terms of skin color and hair, but also in terms of shapes and in terms of, what different bodies can or can't do. So it's definitely an area that there hasn't been so much representation of, showing, disability. but it's also an exciting space where there's a lot of opportunities to do that.
Yeah, we had that last year actually. We did a comic for another organization, and there was a point made of like visible disability. So we had to have a
Hmm.
think about how to reflect that. And as the character we did with hearing implants, and they used sort of a form of sign language. So we had to like figure out how to represent that in a comic, in a static images character making use of sign language. So that was an interesting challenge, but yeah, added something like different to the story. So I can see how particularly if it's not your perspective, you might first of all just overlook it completely. I can see how easy it is to do that, but then when you do like come to it, then it's like, okay, how do we do it, and how do you take on that challenge from a story perspective of making sure that representation is there?
Yeah, and actually, there's other areas, that you can explore, as you said, in the mind. I
Mm,
talk a little bit about neurodivergence in the
yeah.
book. And because animation allows you to visualize what's inside, you can also show how different people might view or experience the world differently. So that's also an area that's really exciting and where there can be a lot of exciting storytelling opportunities.
Cool. And we look at animation today, and you kind of touched on like the difficulties in it. Is there something that you might have done to break into the world of animation that you think wouldn't work today?
That's an interesting question because a lot of things are changing
Mm,
rapidly today. In terms of meeting people, I would say that hasn't changed so much, trying to build connections with people. And it's still about, your work showing your own perspective,
mm.
your own work,
Like your voice.
your own voice, yeah. And that's what is going to make you stand out. So I would say be careful with, generative AI tools. It's difficult to know how that's going to, it's going really fast, and it's
Mm,
hard to know how it's going to evolve long term. But the audience still wants a good story, and they want to hear your authentic voice, not, a machine's voice. So yeah, try to focus on bringing out your most authentic voice in your work.
mm.
Focus on things that interest you.
Yeah, I think with the AI thing, I was at an event recently, and someone made a really good point that I'm gonna copy and paste and use in different places. But they made a point like, see, make sure I get this right. So AI is like inherently convergent. So it's taking ideas. Obviously, there's issues about where and how it's taking ideas, but it's taking ideas and sort of converging on the average by definition, like that. So maybe super polished, but it's like the average, whereas human creativity is divergent and
Hmm.
it's completely different odds. And I feel it's important to, yeah, however this this thing shakes out, which is arguably going too fast, but however it shakes out, I think that's important to remember that like human creativity is divergent. And then, like you said, that authenticity in it, I think we can forget that polish doesn't mean authentic. And I think
Yeah.
that's, yeah, important to remember.
That's a really good point. And, AI doesn't have nuances. And
Mm,
that's what we need in storytelling. Especially, we were talking about inclusivity in storytelling. I was at a conference on AI used by screenwriters a few years ago. And there were some filmmakers. I was in the Czech Republic, so there were Czech filmmakers. And they were saying, well, when I ask, AI to create a character based on my culture, it's very cliched because the stuff that's been fed into it has been, not has been just one culture, one
yeah,
perspective.
stereotypical.
So that's really dangerous as well. And and
Mm,
and we need nuance, and we're not going to get it from machines. We're going to get it from us. So that's definitely something we need to preserve as storytellers in the future.
mm. Yeah, for sure. And looking at where you are at the moment, like what would you say has been your biggest achievement in your career so far?
Well, this book actually, I would say it's been it's the first time that I undertake such a big project,
Mm.
So I'm quite I still can, I've worked on a Word document for 2 years, and now it's a physical object, and it's still difficult for me to make that connection. So I'm quite I was quite proud of that one, and I'm excited now to start sharing it with the world. And I'm very curious to see, what people can get out of it. But for me, success is being able to do the job that I do every day. So it's not, it's not only the big achievements. I think it's easy in this industry because it's so hard to make a film, to bring a project, to finish a project and then you move on to the next one. But you don't really, stop and appreciate the journey you go on. So I like to focus, on the little successes every day and just take time to enjoy that journey.
No, it's a good outlook. And I also wanted to ask, what was the biggest challenge from making the book, and what did you learn from it?
Ooh, well, that what we were saying, how it's important to bring out your voice in a piece of work, your own authentic voice. I interviewed over 40 people for this book, so I had a lot of voices.
Yeah.
So I think that was the most challenging, really trying to capture everyone's voice and also find my own in the writing. That's something I found quite challenging. And it was just a lot of writing and rewriting. There was no other way around it.
Yeah, just get through it. Just go through
Yeah,
it is the process. That is the
yeah.
process.
Actually, also, like, maybe a big challenge was also getting started when I'd done all the research. Maybe because of that, I think I got a bit scared to, oh my gosh, I interviewed all these people. Where do I start, And yeah, it's one little step at a time, really. You write one paragraph, one sentence, one paragraph, one chapter, and bit by bit, you have a book. Yeah, that's how I got through it.
Nice. Okay. And we do like to remind people that, we're all protagonists in our own stories, and the good protagonists do have a goal and a vision of success. So for your story, Alizée, what does success look like to you, and are you there yet?
So I always say I'm a very ambitious person, and my ambition is that I enjoy the work that I do every day. I mean, there's always going to be something, sometimes some task you don't enjoy that much in work, but just I'm really lucky to be doing the work that I do. And I'm really ambitious in that way, in that I want to be able to keep doing this work. So for me, success is, being able to be behind the scenes, like I wanted to when I was younger, being able to interact with creatives every day, helping them develop their stories. That for me is success. I don't think and continuing to work on really exciting projects, really exciting stories. Uh, yeah, I would say that's how I define success for me.
I like it. In each interview, we like to ask our guests to give advice for aspiring creative professionals. So we've been talking writing and animation. So, Alizée, what advice do you have for others listening who may want to create their own animated stories and put them out into the world?
So I kind of touched into this earlier, but I actually want to read you a quote that I got from an interview from the book because I think it summarizes it so well. And this is a quote from an interview with British filmmaker Kibwe Tavares, who made a short film called Robots of Brixton. That was his first work into the industry. So I
Hmm.
interviewed him about his journey to make that film. And one of the things that he told me, which I find very inspiring, and I want to share with you, is look from within rather than outside. Nobody sees the world like you. Build on things you want to learn, talk about, and your interests, and be honest with yourself. Put your vision out into the world. You will stand out more than by imitating others.
Hmm.
So that was the one I wanted to share with everyone from Kibwe Tavares.
Cool. Yeah. No notes on that, as a good reminder, and hopefully, people can take that with you. Yeah, thank you for that. So, yeah, let us know, listeners, what you think. If you're again working on stories yourself, like I said, you can jump in our Discord. You can send us an email, studio77 at mayamada.com. Before we wrap up for this episode, we want to end with our bonus round.
Yeah, so this is the part where we throw in follow-up questions or random questions that didn't quite fit anywhere else. So as someone that's lived in many countries, what's stood out to you from some of the places you've lived or even traveled to?
That's a big question. Let me think of, when I lived in the UK. What's something that
Definitely not weather.
I mean, it could stand out for its miserableness, however you word that.
um, well, the different places I've lived kind of coincide with like different parts of my life. So there's just so many things I could answer. I'm trying to think. Well, actually, something that stood out for me in the film industry in the UK is that thing I mentioned earlier, that sense of like people working in film are all artisans, and we all, you know, people who are more senior help people who are junior to get in, and there's that culture of really mentorships, of helping each other, which may seem like it's like that everywhere, but it's not. I've encountered other countries where there's not so many mentorships. There's not that culture in a way of senior creatives helping younger creatives. And that's something that's great, that I found in the UK, and I think it's something that really needs to be preserved as a culture, of creators. So I think what you guys are doing is amazing, because it falls into that.
Thank you. And then, is there any role along your journey that you've realized is absolutely not for you, that you've been like, that I'm never going to do or never want to be a part of?
Yes. So I said earlier that I chose to be a producer at university, and I have a huge respect for producers because I could not handle that level of stress. It is not for me. So yeah, that's the one where it's like, nope, been there, done that, not again.
Fair. And then lastly, where can people find you and your book online?
So I'm mainly on LinkedIn and Instagram. My Instagram is just my first name, Alizée, and then underscore my last name. So yeah, people can reach out to me on LinkedIn and Instagram. I always try to respond. I'm really busy at the moment, so I may take some time, but eventually, I will get back to you. So the book, you can find it in the UK from Waterstones and Foils, and you can also order it from Amazon. And there should be a link in the description for you to have a look.
Nice. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us and then taking time out to talk to us about the book, about your journey. Definitely picked up a lot.
Thank you again for inviting me. It's been great.
Yeah, no worries. And hopefully listeners enjoyed that. Don't forget, this podcast is one of the Studio 77 shows that we do. Studio 77 is the mayamada platform where we host different shows with creative professionals and also on occasion play games for your amusement. So each month we've got a variety of different shows. We've got the Studio 77 report that I talked about earlier, casual conversations with comic creators, and also games night as well. So yeah, make sure you're following us on Twitch and YouTube as well. You can pick your option. We stream on both. And if you're a young aspiring creative professional or you know of one, then check out the mayamada Showrunners Work Experience program. So we are creating opportunities for young people age 16 and up to work with our team across comic production, events, and content creation as well. So you can email us showrunners@mayamada.com to find out more. And if you did enjoy this episode of Story X Story, then make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a future episode and interview discussion that we have. You can also give us a 5-star rating and review, which helps us reach new listeners and fans of story discussions. We're story creators ourselves, and you can discover the mayamada universe online. Our manga is there, including the latest release, Origins Against All Odds. As for the podcast, we release new episodes on Thursdays, and those include those creator interviews and video game discussions and deep dives into stories across pop culture. You can always give us a shout directly. Our email address is studio77@mayamada.com, and our website with links to subscribe is mayamada.com/storyxstory. So thank you for tuning in. And until next time, stay safe. And remember that our podcast is actually nothing like sketching, because we believe it's better to use 1,000 words or more if you ask. So take care, everyone.